This is Dan Dix here reporting for Press for Truth. Glad to have you joining us here today, folks, because we got a great show lined up for you. So let's just jump right into it. Today, joining me on the line is Rick Mehta. He is an associate professor of psychology at Acadia University in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And he has recently found himself, after being teaching there for 14 years, found himself just thrusted into the limelight, into the center stage of the battle for free speech here in Canada, because it seems that these Marxist ideologies have made their way into the schools, the faculty, the curriculum, and now right down to the students. And we're starting to see the effects of this all across the nation as we're seeing freedom of speech constantly being stifled by these people. And now, you know, we've seen it happen with Professor Jordan Peterson and now Rick Mehta, as he has apparently made controversial statements which have, let's just say, triggered some of these students and caused them to launch petitions to try to have him fired. In fact, the faculty launched an official investigation into him. So this is indeed getting very real and very serious. So Rick, thank you so much, first of all, for taking some time to speak with us here today at Press for Truth.
Yeah, my pleasure. So glad to be here.
Now, I want to get into some of the specifics about some of these allegedly controversial things that you've said, which these students have a problem with. But before we get into that, maybe you could just start us off from the beginning here. How did all of this start for you?
Well, actually, for me, where when I became outspoken was in July. So it was at a union meeting where I really became angry and spoke out, because you're hearing this room of people, you know, you're hearing people with six-figure salaries complaining about how pressed they are and need more money. And so I was thinking, you know, get real. And so at the meeting, I said, well, wait a minute, we have our support staff. They forego raises. They forwent, you know, they basically gave up raises in the past, whereas we actually got them. And, you know, they're quite, if anything, you know, more overworked and under-resourced than we are. So what about money for them? And their response was pretty much just dismissive. And so that just really appalled me. And so that's when I spoke out. The writing was on the wall after that. So then I wrote an open letter that I circulated to the university community. So then during contract negotiations, I tried to speak out using emails, you know, hoping that maybe some sane voices would join me. But that was complete silence, or maybe private emails, but nothing more than that. So that's when I tried to take to social media to reach the general public about, you know, here's what's happening with our contract negotiations. So that didn't really do too much. So where I got into the public spotlight was surprisingly the place where I least expected it, which was when I sent a tweet to Andrew Scheer just saying, you know, you say you stand for free speech, but you're not standing by Senator Lynn Bayak. So are you trying to say then that we're going to treat the Indigenous differently from the rest of us? Because if you're saying that, that's really bad for race relations. So I thought I was just putting out a tweet like any other ordinary Canadian, not in my professional capacity. And that just what started a major storm with then a petition to have me fired, followed by another petition to have me staying. So two counter petitions. So I did not know at the time, but actually now there's evidence for this on the Aboriginal People's Television Network. On their website, there was a story saying then that the media person said to the students, or anyone who was offended by that, we're going to set things up so that you don't have to take courses with Rick Mehta if you don't want to. And so that then explains why the department took away my courses. So with the intro psych courses, rather than teach the large ones that are taken by, you know, as a required course, I've been giving the small section in its place. My research methods course has been taken away from me, which is required by all psych majors. And what's interesting about that is it's being taught now by a colleague of mine who's heavily involved with what's called WISE, Women in Science and Engineering. So she's taking the entire year of the course. And so is a lab instructor who's also heavily involved with WISE. And what's interesting about both of them is that they both are involved with various equity committees like pay equity and employment equity. So I'll let the listeners decide, or the viewers decide, whether that just happens to be by chance alone. So anyway, the courses were taken from me by the department. I put in an appeal, and the dean just said, your arguments don't hold any water. So he upheld the appeal. And then in my courses, I talked about some of the problems with the notion of equity and how it, it doesn't work and whatnot. I questioned, I talked about how the pay gap is not real. And then I also presented a feminist critique of the education system, and that feminist critique actually said that it discriminates against boys. And so that then was followed by a letter saying I'm going to be investigated for my in-class behavior, my tweets on social media, the emails I've sent to campus, because it violates our harassment and discrimination policy. But when you actually look at the policy, it's quite vague. And what's interesting about it, it says that intention doesn't matter. So all that matters is outcomes. So there's no way that I could be treated fairly under a judicial system that's that open to being in favor of the sort of, complainer's perspective. And it's far harsher than what's in place in the legal system right now. So at that point, I just decided, you know what, I'm just going to go put this in the court of public opinion, let the public decide who's being the reasonable one here.
Well, all you're really doing here is stating facts that are turning out to be controversial when they shouldn't. You mentioned Indigenous rights. I know you have said before that you feel that Indigenous policies have fostered this victimhood mentality, and I have to completely agree with you there. In fact, you talked about tweeting about that, and I have a tweet here that I think you just simply retweeted it, and it says, it's statistically impossible for all Native children to have had a negative experience with residential schools. To deny this fact would be just as bad as denying the majority that we did have negative experiences. Truth is truth. And to that, one of the petitions that was launched responded by saying, Professor Rick Mehta of Acadia University expressed he is against trans rights. He believes residential schools did good, and he believes that Indigenous industry are exploiting Western values of justice. All these groups are protected under the Nova Scotia Human Rights Act. The marginalized communities in Nova Scotia cannot feel comfortable having this man, who is against so many protected marginalized groups, teaching classes at a respected university such as Acadia. We demand the full removal of Rick Mehta from the university, including teaching classes and lectures. So what kind of a response do you give to that? I mean, it's hard to wrap one's mind around it. I've had to deal with similar things. I've made statements like the fact that there are only two genders, or that some transgendered people are suffering from a mental disorder. And it wasn't that long ago that these statements weren't controversial at all. They were considered fact, but now I'm, people say, I hate the trans community when I don't whatsoever. It seems, I'm sure you are not a racist individual. So how do you respond to these ridiculous claims about you?
Basically, the problem with the whole human rights, the way it works now, is that you're giving people protected status based on who they are, and that is not what human rights has been, traditionally. So there's that we all have certain rights, and so if you don't have them, that's when you can then press for charges within the system. That's what it's traditionally been. But really, this all, I think, started with the election of the Justin Trudeau Liberals, because in 2016, when I was teaching my third-year hormones, drugs, and behavior class, I was able to talk about sex differences, and no one even blinked an eye. So what I suspect is happening is we had a government come in, and it's based on a social justice agenda that really wasn't disclosed during the campaign. So if he's putting pressure then on the universities to adopt that and the education system. So now what we're seeing is the students who are in the elementary or high school systems, they're now in the university system, and now we're seeing the full effect of that. And so that's why now what I've been tweeting is that the entire education system has become corrupted. We need to just put a stop to this right now and rebuild the entire education system right from the ground up, and needs to be done by the general public. It can't be done by the professors or whatnot. And so I'm more than willing to reapply for my own job based on my record and based on my recordings of my introductory psychology classes. I'll let the public decide.
Well, on that note, how do you think, or what are some of the practical ways that we can reverse this trend? Because as you said, I think this is coming straight from the top. We've literally been infiltrated by a feminist social justice warrior who is now leading the country, and his ideologies are permeating down throughout society, straight into the schools and into our children's minds. So what are some of the steps we can take to begin to reverse this trend?
Well, in other interviews, I talked about, writing to various officials at the university, but I think really this has to be something where we take it from the government. So maybe it needs to be something drastic, like taking the kids out of the school system altogether, or not sending your kids to university, just period. This just needs to be shut down pronto. There's no other way. This needs really swift action. So the kind of imagery that comes to mind is the way the Berlin Wall came down. This just needs to be stopped in its tracks right now. I can't think of any other recourse.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems we're in a need for honest discussions here and honest debate, but what seems to happen is they have this shut him down mentality. And I think we need to be able to discuss things with one another in an open manner and respect each other's opinions, because that's really all you're doing is expressing your opinions. And facts don't care about your feelings, folks, as most people know. What are some of the other things? You mentioned the pay gap, as well as the Indigenous rights issues. Has there been any other so-called controversial statements that you've made that some of these kids think you shouldn't be saying?
So when I talked about, so there was sex differences, intelligence, race differences. So the race differences, I talked about, of course, based on what we know about heritability ratios, that's probably going to be a major contributor to what we see with the racial differences. So there is the genetic component that you can't deny. So I think people are angry about that part. And then I said, let's look at the social component a little bit more closely. What's in the textbooks are the issues, those concepts like the stereotype threat or implicit bias. And I talked about how those are complete nonsense that have been debunked. So I said, well, what maybe could explain that? And so in class, I showed a video clip with Thomas Sewell. So there was an interview with him. And so his argument was that it's the liberal economic policies are the ones that are keeping, people like Black people in the States down. And so by extension, that could extend to the Indigenous in Canada. So I didn't state that explicitly, but I was hoping they would draw that kind of a conclusion. And so that definitely drew a huge response in terms of people leaving the classes and really being upset with me. So the next class, I just tried to say the reason wasn't try to guilty or make you feel guilty or anything like that. It's just that, even though I'm a, liberal myself, is that, I've been spending my whole life as a voter voting on economic issues when I don't really understand how economics works. So that then makes me not being an informed citizen who can actually, engage in society. So that means that we really need to have courses in economics and understand our economics background more thoroughly. So that was the argument that I was trying to make.
Yeah, well, that's a great argument. In fact, I wish we'd bring Austrian economics into the curriculum so that students could really have a solid understanding of what that's all about. And at this point, I mean, you said you've been blocked from teaching certain classes, I believe. What is the likelihood that you think you're going to be able to get back into the swing of things and try to turn these kids' minds around in the classroom?
Well, actually, I haven't been blocked from teaching. So the intro psych classes, so I'm still teaching them, but instead of the large sections, I've been given small sections. And so actually I'm looking at it on a bright side. So the way I'll structure the course is that if you want to be just given ideology, take the course everyone else has taken. But if you want to be toughened up so that you can go out into the world and become a productive member of society, stick with me and I'll show you how to do it. So I'm going to be able to, put a positive way spin on this. I think I can do that is, if you just want your standard course that you could get at any institution in North America, go, take the one that everyone else takes. But if you want something that's going to, like I said, make you actually learn something and make you into a contributing member of society who can think and reason, come with me. So I'm going to try to put it in my own way where it works to my advantage. It gives me something to offer that others don't, because with a standard intro psych course, you can just get that online. There's no reason to even come to university if that's what you want. So I try to put it in a different way that makes my course unique.
Well, I think that is fantastic. I think that's a similar approach that Professor Jordan Peterson took, and he ended up launching, his own lectures on YouTube, essentially. Do you have any plans to do anything similar? Do you yourself have a YouTube channel, and is there a way that people can and tap in and listen to your lectures?
Well, so far I've been doing all of my communication. It was primarily through Facebook, and then after Lindsay Shepherd, I decided to go onto Twitter. So far what's on my YouTube page is the panel discussion I organized on free speech back in May, and then a talk that I did on free speech, which you can go to the Dropbox folder, and you can see there's 20 pages of references there, because I treated that as a very serious academic talk, with a serious concrete set of proposals at the end for discussion, which none of us, materialized. So far, the only thing I'd used for my YouTube channel was for those purposes. But now what I think I'm going to do is, once the classes are over, is actually do videos of the classes that got me into trouble. So tell the public, here's what happened. So that's something I'll do in the early summer. Then maybe, because I'll be teaching the Intro Psych 2 in the first semester, is there actually record those and post those on YouTube. So I think there it actually forms a story. There's a reason for people to actually come to my channel. So before I wasn't really planning on using it, but now that there's a reason for it, because I don't want to just have something and waste people's time, because there's so many YouTube channels and so many bloggers out there. So the question is, why should they come to mine? And I think now I actually have a reason to do it, and I can thank the university for that.
Absolutely. You would think they learned their lesson from Peterson, but it doesn't seem that they have. And I would see it now as that we're kind of at a fork in the road when it comes to the direction that freedom of speech can go in Canada. So now is the time to have people as brave as yourself to take a stand for freedom of speech here in Canada. So I think that's fantastic that you're taking the initiative to continue to spread this information all across the internet so people can see what's truly happening here in Canada. So for anybody who's just learning about you now, who's just coming across this information, why don't you let them know what is the YouTube channel, what's the URL, and where can they find you on Twitter?
I don't know the URL for my YouTube channel, but if you just go into YouTube, type in Rick Mehta, and be sure to say free speech, because if you don't write in free speech, you're going to get a whole load of Bollywood. So I think that would be the one thing that I would say about the YouTube. On Facebook, if you type in my name, my picture is there now. I think it's Rick Mehta 98, but I think if you just type in my name into Facebook, there's a picture of me there. And the backdrop is of a mountain in Iceland. So I wanted something that it would capture who I am as a person, which is someone who is by nature rather lighthearted and someone who likes nature in general. So that's how you can easily spot me. And I have that same picture and background on Twitter. So my handle on Twitter is Rick R. Mehta. Okay.
All right, I'll find the YouTube channel indeed, and we'll have all of these links located in the description below. So, any final thoughts on just the current state of the battle of free speech here in Canada, and where you see this going in the coming days, weeks, months? Any final thoughts on what needs to be done?
Well, I think as citizens, we really need to get engaged and actually take action, because I really fear for the next generation, right? So, and it's also with our own basic liberties. They actually are at stake, probably more so than people think. So we really need to take action. And I think with the upcoming election, now is the time to mobilize. But again, I think what we want to do differently from the past is I don't want to create a social movement, because that just becomes a major case of groupthink, but is that we come together as individuals who have a common problem that we want to solve. Then once the problem is solved, we want to go our separate ways. So I think that's what I want to do, advocate for differently, is that it's not a social movement. I don't want any form of groupthink, is that we want to do something where we're working together as individuals. And that's, I think, really asserting our individuality, I think, is the most important. So just how can we actually just get consensus as opposed to uniformity.
I love it. Collectivism indeed is a large part of the problem that we're dealing with here. So being able to break that down and to let people know the importance of freedom of the individual's rights to run their own lives is extremely important. Jumping outside of that groupthink mentality. So once again, Professor Mehta, thank you so much for taking the time. We're going to have the links located in the description below, and keep up the great work. I want to thank you for your courage for getting up there and putting yourself out there and doing what you're doing. It's very important. As I said, we are in this fork in the road here in Canada when it comes to free speech. So once again, sir, thank you so much for your courageous work.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Thank you for having me.